Why did you go see President Trump, and what did you speak about?
Glad we're starting with a good question. Shortly after the general election in November of last year, I was invited to go and meet with then President-elect Trump, specifically to talk about an issue that I have been very focused on for years now, which is Syria. Ending the counterproductive regime change war in Syria that Congress and you, the American people, have not authorized or declared. My goal in that meeting was to try to provide some influence and some insight on my strong views on these issues and why they're so important for us here at home, in the hopes of basically trying to get to him before the neocon war hawks who were beating their war drums were able to exercise their influence over him. Unfortunately, as we've seen over the last 10 days or so, I think they were successful. I've been very outspoken in criticizing and calling out his missile strike against Syria as being reckless and careless and an escalation of this regime change war in Syria, and one that Congress has not authorized. You know, when people ask me sometimes, Tulsi, why are you focused on Syria and why is that important to us here at home? When we have challenges here in our community, why should I care about what's happening over there? And I remind folks about the cost of these wars and the consequences of our policies. That when you look at our country's regime change wars, whether it was Iraq, Libya, or now in Syria, and the trillions of dollars, your dollars, that have been spent on these wars, there is a direct connection between where those dollars have been spent and the difficulty and lack of resources that we have here at home to fund things like our public schools, to take care of our infrastructure, to help protect our environment, to help improve our healthcare system, to take care of folks who are living on the streets and without homes, to deal with so many of the challenges that we have here at home. You cannot separate these two issues, which is one of the reasons I've been fighting against these regime change wars. Wars that have cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives. Wars that have created millions of refugees. And wars that have ultimately resulted in strengthening terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Counterproductive to our national security interests, what to speak of the American lives that have been lost. So for so many reasons, it's critical for each of us to understand the connection, to understand that we cannot afford to be the world's police. That even with the best of intentions, our actions have so often, again, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, our actions have resulted in more human suffering, not less. Our actions have resulted in more destruction, not less. And this is why it's important for us to stand up now, especially at a time when people in both political parties and when people in the media are applauding this president for launching this illegal attack against Syria. This is when our voices are critical to stand up and say no. This is where the power base lies, in your voices, and I ask you to stand with me in making sure that we don't turn a blind eye to this illegal escalation. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
First of all, I want to congratulate you on taking that very tough stand on Syria. I think sometimes it's actually harder to take, as a soldier, to disobey an illegal order. And I think that you did the right thing. I absolutely agree with you 100% on that.
Thank
now,
you, Danny.
The ultimate culprit, as you already started to mention, is that this country, the war establishment in Washington has been fixated on regime change. In other words, going to other countries and changing their government. And in fact, may I remind everybody, the first regime change started in 1893, right here in Hawaii. So my question is, how do we educate and mobilize more people? Because most of the people still, especially on the continent, do not realize that the American empire is fixated on regime change. If they understand that, I think they'll understand this is not Department of Defense, it's a Department of Offense.
Thank you, Danny. Your question is exactly on point. How do you educate people? Because too many people are not aware of what our country's policies have been or the consequences of those policies. So education is key. Holding leaders who are continuously pushing our country into these regime change wars accountable is key. This was one of the frustrations that I had during the presidential election last year, is that no one in the media was asking and holding accountable people who were running to be our commander-in-chief. They were not being asked directly their position, what actions they would take. Would they continue and escalate the regime change war in Syria, or would they put an end to it so that the people of Syria could find their way back to stability and peace? So this accountability and this education needs to come from all sectors, and every single one of you has an opportunity to help educate others. And this is critical. I can't overstate this enough. This is something that I'm trying to continue to do with my colleagues in Congress, who are very quick to call for military action, very quick to call for regime change wars. And these people need to be held accountable for their positions and need to be educated about why it is not good for the people in these countries, as history has proven, and why it is counterproductive to our interests here in the United States as well. You only have to remind people again about the cost. What is the cost of these wars? There are so many needs that our communities have here. We need to focus on investing and rebuilding our communities here at home, not starting more regime change wars in other parts of the world.
My question is with Congress voting for a declaration of war to take us into war, then why can't they vote to take us out? I mean, where does it end, like with Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we're moving on to Syria? I mean, what's the final point where, funding and troops actually stop? Why is there not a bill to allow Congress to take us out of war? And at least with a roll call, we'll know when it comes election time who was and wasn't against war at what time, if that roll call continues on.
Yeah, thank you. This goes to the heart of the issue, is that Congress has not voted or authorized this war in Syria. This war against Syria did not begin with President Trump's missile strike a few days ago. It began years before that, when our government, your taxpayer dollars, began being used to provide arms, weapons, salaries, intelligence assistance to armed militants within Syria who were working directly with and often under the command of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda to overthrow the Syrian government. We provided this support indirectly through countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, who for their own interests wanted to see the Syrian government overthrown, and who were providing support to these terrorist groups working towards that end as well. So this illegal regime change war has been waged for years, and Trump's missile strike really was an escalation of this illegal war that was never debated on the House floor, that you never had a say in, and that was never voted on so that you could hold your leaders accountable for it. Part of the problem here is that over the years, Congress has ceded its authority because too many people to the executive branch, because too many people are afraid of being on the record. They don't want to be held accountable. So I agree with you, Congress needs a vote. If the president wants to take our country into war, then Congress needs to exercise its authority in having that debate, in representing your voices and having a vote. Thank you.
Next question submitted written. Why did you meet with Assad and what was discussed?
The people of Syria are suffering in ways that you can't even imagine. I met with teenagers, young women, young men who have personally been tortured, been raped, watched family members killed before their very eyes, all by these different terrorist groups who are continuing this regime change war. People are suffering as a result of the sanctions. I met small business owners, these women who've been best friends since high school, who are now in their 50s, who had a thriving business, sewing and making garments, employed a lot of people. Their business was completely destroyed because of this war, and now they've started to try to pick back up the pieces, but can't because of the sanctions regimes that are in place. There is such devastation that has come about as a result of this, and I met with Assad to try to further the cause of understanding and peace. And when it comes right down to it, we cannot further the cause of peace and understanding without meeting with people who we disagree with, even if they may be our adversaries. We can't just meet with our friends and think that that is going to bring about peace magically somehow. The people of Syria are not interested in politics. They're not interested in these debates that we see between talking heads on TV every day. They're interested in life and peace and a future for their kids and their families. That's all they're asking for. They're asking us to stay out of it, to stop fueling this regime change war, and let the Syrian people determine the future of Syria for themselves. Thank you.
Aloha, Tulsi, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great.
All right.
Been a while.
Yeah.
I just admire your spunk and your bravery. Going out to Syria and letting all the people of this area know that you're doing your work. You're a very brave person. As a combat wounded veteran myself, I commend you for your bravery.
Thank you for your service.
It takes a lot of guts to get out there and face your enemies sometimes. But it's good to see you again. I'm
Mahalo.
glad you're doing a great job out there. Keep up the good work.
Mahalo, Uncle.
Mahalo.
Aloha.
I salute you as one veteran to another. I salute for your service and service to your country and being our congresswoman. I served in Korea in the 70s, and I know how the North Koreans are. We should not provoke the North Korean leader because I have firsthand experience by serving there, and I know how they are. All I'm saying tonight is that we should not provoke the North Korean leader because that's what they train for. They train for war.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, some people make the mistake of saying, well, Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, he's a lunatic. He's crazy. But I have heard from many experts, and when you look at the situation, and you realize, well, his actions follow a certain form of logic. And it speaks back to this common thread that's come up throughout the night about regime change war. North Korea has nuclear weapons as a deterrent to regime change. That is why they refuse to let go of their nuclear weapons. And when they look at what we did in Libya with Gaddafi, when an agreement was made, say, okay, you denuclearize, we're not going to come after you, we're going to allow you to remain in power. And then very soon after we came in, launched another regime change war, toppled him, he was dragged through the street. North Korea is watching this, saying, okay, why should we trust anything when our country has this track record of regime change? So again, our policies have consequences. So now that we here in Hawaii are staring down the barrel, essentially, of a nuclear threat from North Korea, we've got to think through clearly and understand exactly what's going on here. That it's not just a lone actor, but there are, again, consequences to our policies in the past and the policies that we are still playing out today in Syria, that we are still seeing play out today in Syria.
Okay, we're going to take one last question from the floor, and that's from Margaret Willie. Margaret?
Hi, Tulsi.
Aloha, Margaret.
My question for you is, what more can we do to support you in terms of being an independent, fearless voice, whether that's on issues or Democratic Party, national people in Washington, where they're saying, well, she may be supported back in Hawaii, but here in Washington now she's going downhill, But what can we do just so that you stay strong and we help to empower you and your independence, whether we agree with every vote you make or whether we sometimes disagree, but that we believe in you and want to help you?
Thank you. Those guys in Washington have no idea what Hawaii is about and who is Hawaii. And I'm glad that I fit in here and not there.